Saint had found the Langstroth hive the day they moved into the tall house on Pine Hill Cemetery Road, buried beneath dwarf shrubs and succulents and bulbs. She picked a rusting hatchet from the woodshed and hacked a path, her grandmother busy with the movers, a couple of distant cousins with a U-Haul that leaned when they turned because the suspension was shot. She stared at the boxes, the faded grain of the 10-frame, the 3/4-inch lumber, each cut so neat she ran her fingers across the sawn edge. The summer, unruly, they'd driven through a Burlington storm before the heat of Jefferson City, the windows open to a flat wall of air and the promise of something new. She had been lured with talk of a backyard, room for her toys, a neighborhood where you didn't have to leave the street as the sun dropped. She had dragged her grandmother into the yard while her bare-chested cousins heaved her bed frame up to the attic room. "It's a hive," Norma said, then turned and left her. "Can I?" "No." It took Saint the best part of that first year in Monta Clare to convince her grandmother that keeping bees was a good idea. She borrowed a book from the library, spoke of honey each morning, and smacked her lips, chased bees around the yard to convince Norma she was entirely unafraid, and even managed to stem her tears when a worker reared on her and planted its tail in the lobe of her ear. "Are you happy now?" Norma said, balancing Saint on her knee as she tweezed the stinger out. "Very," Saint sniffed. She saved her allowance and ordered in copies of The Hive and the Honey Bee, but fell short of the $5 a year needed to subscribe to the American Bee Journal. Saint was methodical in the breakdown of her grandmother. Each Saturday morning, riding Norma's bus route and perching herself on the seat just behind, her mouth level with Norma's ear so she might bend it with dazzling bee facts. Saint told her 1 out of 3 mouthfuls of food she consumed depended on pollinators, that the buff-tailed bumblebee had a brain the size of a poppy seed, that she had already planted primrose and buddleia and marigold to encourage nectaration, which she wasn't entirely sure was a real word, but Norma didn't question it. And then she brought her A-game, the waggle dance. Maybe it was a communication technique, maybe it was a celebration of bee life, scientists weren't entirely sure, but Saint took to the center aisle as Norma crested Parade Hill, crouched a little, and shook her ass while buzzing at the mouth. "Jesus," Norma said, and she was not one to blaspheme. The following weekend, under promise that it would be Saint's Christmas and birthday gift for the following 200 years, Norma called a supplier over in Boonville, and the order was placed. They spent their summer in the yard. Saint watched intently as Norma wired the frame, handed her cigar box nails before she could ask, fetched iced tea when she began to sweat. Saint read from the limited instructions as she went about the repair, strengthening the comb, replacing the gunny sack, cursing at the goddamn pollen trap. "How come you can do so much?" Saint said, as her grandmother fetched a block plane to smooth a wavelet. "You ever asked that question to your grandfather when he was alive?" Saint shook her head. Norma went on. Saint stood in their driveway waiting for 3 hours, then screeched when she saw the white of the van on its approach. "They're here!" she screamed, as she ran into the house and dragged her grandmother by the hand. Norma did not sleep the night after the bees arrived, walking through the night garden to check on them, waking Saint because of the hum. "Why aren't they sleeping?" Norma said. Saint stood in the dark in her shorts and vest and rubbed at her eyes. "They're cooling the hive. They flap their wings at the same time, and it sounds like an electric fan." "I thought they were dying." Saint clutched her hand as they walked back toward the house. "I'm glad you care about the bees, Grandma." $20. I want my honey." Norma looped a small cloth canopy over the tree beside the hive, and Saint did her schoolwork beneath it, watching the workers and sometimes singing, "Be Thou My Vision," and "Abide with Me." Saint did not make friends, though she aimed her smiles, did not raise her hand too much, even though she knew the answers, and invited each girl in her class to come see the hive, spending an hour fashioning each invitation, dotting hand-drawn bees with glitter glue and crepe paper.